Good morning, folks. Just pausing and seeing my co-host should be here any second, but I'm Kate Heffernan. I'm the education director at Down Under School of Yoga. I'm one of the lead trainers of our 200-hour teacher training, and also one of the trainers who contributes into the 300-hour teacher training as well. Justine Cohen, the owner of the studio, the founder of the studio, also is one of the main trainers, and she should be arriving here any moment. But as we are paused, if any of you are willing, if you wouldn't mind just like unmuting and giving us just a quick, like, what brings you here? Anyone? If you're
I
willing.
don't mind starting.
Yeah.
Hi, my name's Ria. I did my 200 hour at Universal Power Yoga in Norwood. They have
Oh,
a couple
sure.
different locations. Yeah. But I live out in Northborough.
Okay.
So, I mean, I'm not
Student.
really close to any yoga studio that does a 300 hour. But I go to Metro West Yoga in Westboro, and a bunch of the instructors there had recommended Down Under.
Oh,
And so that's why I'm looking into it. And I'd really like to be 500 hour certified like in the next couple years at some point. So just trying to figure out if this is the right time or not.
totally. Great.
And I teach a couple days a week right now.
Perfect. Where do you teach?
At Core Connection in Northborough. So it's like
Okay.
an exercise studio. They have yoga, Pilates, some
Wonderful.
other modalities. Yeah.
Great. Anyone else? Ria got us started. Anyone else willing to share why you're here? Just a couple of quick words.
Hi, my name is Kenya.
Mhm.
I got my 200-hour certification through Core Power right here in Boston.
Sure.
And I taught for Core Power for a little while. I took a little break. And one thing that I really, like something that I really wanted was to be 500-hour certified, but I really wanted to like expand my voice. So, like not just speaking like, a core power teacher, but, really finding out like what I want to sound like and what I want to do. Like for me personally, like yoga was something that was definitely like helpful and therapeutic for me during really hard times. But what really made me nervous about like being in the studio was not seeing people who looked like me as teachers. And so that's something that I really want to bring to any community that I'm in because I think that it's important for everyone to be seen and heard.
Totally. Thank you. Anyone else who's willing to share? I'm not going to force you, but
I can
yeah,
go. My
please.
name's Jess, and I did the 200 hour at Down Under, very close to the studio, so it's a good home base. And I heard of the 300 hour. So I finished my 200 hour in June, and I've taught a whopping 2 classes. So I'm still very new to teaching. But I wanted to see and listen to the 300 hour session to see if it would be a good fit for me, just because I am so new to teaching. But I can already tell that there's a lot of things that I want to improve on that I just am not there yet. And I don't know if it's because I'm new or if like more training would be helpful. So that's kind of why I'm here, seeing what it's about.
All right. Anyone else who's on the screen feel like sharing? You don't have to. Okay. So already you all have sort of given us a fairly good cross section. The 300 hour, a lot of folks have different reasons why they come to the 300, and some folks come directly out of their 200. Some folks teach for a little bit. Some folks have been teaching for years and years. And just like the 200, which we aptly name Begin the Journey, this training is something that is meant to continue your teaching into the art of excellent teaching. So even if you're only teaching a little bit, the beauty of the 300 is that it is spread out over a course of a year. It's an incubation lab, and it gives you space to have guaranteed time to come together into a community and learn and to teach. And so in that way, even if you're only teaching a little bit publicly, this allows you to sort of try out new things, feel out your voice, learn tactics, and then be able to bring that back into your teaching in a way that feels really really aligned, right? You don't have to try things out in a sort of haphazard way on your students. You can try them out in the sort of incubation lab of the studio with the other 300-hour trainees, get some feedback from your teachers, and then you can start to integrate little bits and pieces throughout the year into your actual teaching. So that's my first off. I want to introduce Justine. Thanks for being here. I already introduced myself, so I'll let you introduce yourself. And if you want to say a couple words, I would love that.
Okay. Nice to meet you all, everybody. Sorry, I'm all rugged up, but from now until December, if it is possible to work outside, I work outside. That's like the down under element. We just refuse to go indoors. So I am the director and owner of Down Under. I'm one of the leads that you'll work with in the 300. Very interesting listening to all the different reasons that bring you here. I think I would begin by kind of giving you the context of why you do a 300. And I think you've all already sort of spoken to the reason. I think I want to begin by just normalizing why for us, the 300 is just an inevitable, if not a necessary part of being a good teacher. And, you know, Jess said she'd done her 200 hour. We think our 200 hours pretty great. Yoga Journal does too, right? When Yoga Journal wants to set the gold standard of teacher trainings, it comes to Down Under's faculty to define what outstanding teacher training goes. So let's pretend our 200 hour is as good as it gets. Here's what you can do in a 200 hour, which at most is 11 weekends. We can give you a very good grounding of the structure of yoga poses, hopefully help you have some logical coherence to your cueing. Hopefully you go from the ground up. Bonus points if you can use some oppositional actions. And you should walk away from a 200 hour really understanding the basic families of yoga poses and being able to cue them. Does that make sense? What are other things we'd want to do in a 200 hour? I mean, I hope that we get you off your mat, not demoing cat and cow. We have you start to walk around the room, notice your body language, make some eye contact. I hope that in a 200 hour, because some of you are coming from non-down under 200 hours, you have some sense of audibility and vocal modulation and the ability to create space in a room that's meaningful. I think we can give you a very good first pass at anatomy. I think we can give you cocktail party knowledge of yoga philosophy, right? Hopefully you know a couple of sutras, some of the basic concepts of yoga philosophy, but that's pretty much it. So even if you're God's gift to teaching, does it become clear that a 200 hour can give you a toolkit of skills that you know, Masaki calls it learning the alphabet. It's not really writing poetry yet. We're giving you the ingredients. You know what sequencing is. You know use of anatomy or use of philosophy. You know a little bit about how to construct and deliver a sequence. The problem is, and the thing Yoga Alliance will never tell you, is that that piece of paper, for 90% of people, means that you get out into the world and start teaching. Now, this may or may not be your experience. You get up on your feet, you start to deliver the sequence, you can kind of get through it, especially if you're in the gyms or places that have a ready-made community, you'll have bodies to teach. But 90% of people who do a teacher training in America hit a very distinct plateau, which is that even with those skills, nobody is changing their work schedule to come and take your class. Does that make sense? And it's because there's only so much we can teach you in 11 weekends. And it isn't the art of extraordinary teaching. So when Down Under we're like in our 20th anniversary year, you know, there was a lot of teachers who said we shouldn't go with the Yoga Alliance model because it's a little bit, not fraudulent, but like it's a little bit misleading to suggest that 200 hours or 11 weekends is what it takes to make a good teacher. Does that make sense to you so far? Feel free to jump in, ask questions about a lot of what I'm saying. But what you watch in America is that teacher training is primarily a cash grab. What that means is the owner of the studio usually runs the 200 hour. They'll pick a couple of other teachers. The owner will keep all the revenue. They'll teach you to teach like them, and then they'll send you out in the world to have the experience that 90% of teachers do, which is why most people who emerge with a teacher training do not go on to have teaching careers. They give it a go for a year, they hit a wall, they feel dispirited, understandably, like it's them, and then they go back to their corporate job. So I'm laying the context so you really understand what Down Under is and why it's a school. We've spent 20 years fighting against that model. If we had our druthers, we would just level with you all that it takes 500 hours to make a good teacher, because we've got to teach you the alphabet, but actually the magic starts to happen when you can write poetry. Or think of it as you're learning to tune an instrument, but then you actually have to learn to play. And playing the instrument is what has someone change their work schedule to come to Ria's class or Jess's class or Gigi's class. Does that make sense? And so that is not something that we can do in 11 weekends. So we very deliberately call our 200-hour Begin the Journey. Does that make sense? And the 300-hour is called The Art of Extraordinary Teaching. And so I'm going to talk to you a little bit. I am one of many teachers that will work with you over this year-long, what Kate calls an incubation lab. I'm one of many teachers, and I will be your delivery coach. We do not believe in the owner pretends to be an expert in all things. You should not learn history and philosophy of yoga from me. I'd be faking it. I know a good amount. I don't know as much as Sabi Lau, who's spent 10 years with a doctorate from Harvard and from Oxford in religious literature. That's who you want to learn yoga history from. Does that make sense? That's why the cash grab model is a joke. You don't want to learn arm balancing from me because I'm not terribly good at it, but I'm really, really good at doing what I do in the 300. So as I begin to explain who and what our model is, you're going to get some of America's best teachers of all different modalities. So I think, Kenya, did you do the core power training? Kenya, will you had said you did core powers training, agreed? So is it okay if I speak a little bit about your training? I think what you learned, Kenya, was a set sequence that you're allowed to modify in various ways, C1 or C2. And what she said to you at the beginning of this call was, she's kind of wondering, well, if I wasn't told what to teach, if I wasn't given a methodology, what might Kenya want to teach as a human being? She can't even ask herself that question in 11 weekends. She's too busy learning, oh, a hot power sequence. So Jess came out of our 200. She learned a hot power set sequence, a little bit like what Kenya learned from core power, like a set sequence that she can have some variation in. Does that make sense? And then Kate and Michael in our 200, they taught intentional sequencing. What that means is it's a sequence that every week will be completely different. If Kate wants to teach Urdhva Dhanurasana, she's going to sequence a whole series of arm openers, back benders, chest openers, using of core, inner thighs down, tailbone up, to get them ready for the ultimate pose of wheel. Does that make sense? And the next week, she's going to want to teach Virabhadrasana 1, and her whole sequencing is geared towards that peak pose or that philosophical or anatomical principle. Am I beginning to give you guys a sense of how much is out there? My job in the 300 is to bring the world of yoga to your feet and not to teach you how to teach like me. You might end up wanting to be an up the mountain vinyasa teacher who really loves inversions and focuses a lot on this. Or halfway through that, you might discover that you're actually a set sequence lover and that you really want to play with use of dialogue and not think about what clever pose comes next. Or wouldn't it be insane if you fell in love with restorative yoga and discovered your sweet spot was setting people up with a vigorous vinyasa, but what you actually wanted to do was work with connective tissue and use your voice to help someone not explore their relationship with intensity or their relationship with challenge. What if your raison d'etre, your reason for teaching, was you want to cultivate softness? You want your student to ask, what's their relationship to surrender? Now, we barely know each other, but you can understand how I can't do that in 3 months. So the first question is, why is it a year long? You're quite right. It's a pain in the butt for us. It's dedicating a whole bunch of my expert teachers to 40 people for an entire year. And the answer is, that's what it takes to make extraordinarily good teachers. Why do we want to make extraordinarily good teachers? Because this industry is brutally hard to make it in. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit about the business of yoga. In addition to getting some of America's best teachers stretching you personally, north, south, east, and west, because it is our job to answer Kenya's question, I wonder what I want to teach. I wonder what my voice is like. It's actually our job to take Ria beginning to teach and testing it out and equip her with so many skills that she absolutely knows how to run a classroom that elevates this from kind of a fun fitness class into something that people would rather come to their yoga class than pay $150 for a psychology session. Because you know how people love yoga. Like, what is it about it that makes us all devotees of the yoga? It's because of the power of the practice to change things other than your warrior one pose. And that skill is very difficult to impart in 11 weekends. That's what we spend a year cultivating. So what Ria's going to learn is that, yeah, I'm assuming you know how to stand up, hold it together, and maybe sequence a class. Now we're going to start looking at the use of your body language, because 70% of communication is nonverbal, which means the words coming off your tongue only matter so much. There's a whole session and weekend where Kate and I are asking you to unpack your own physical embodiment of what you're saying and begin to see your body as an instrument. Does that make sense? There's a whole weekend. I know you know anatomy. I know you know what your quad and your hamstring is. But the art of use of anatomy in a yoga class, skillfully done, is a whole other thing. I know you technically, conceptually know what use of philosophy is, but we're going to spend an entire weekend unpacking and having, as Kate said in an incubation lab, having you literally try on use of philosophy, use of storytelling, use of imagery, use of metaphor. I haven't even scratched the surface of the many things that go into the type of teaching where people change their work schedule to take your class because of your delivery. That's everything from use of humor to use of silence to how you manifest space, how you keep the momentum of the class moving and give those little individual touches to bring everyone along. All of those pieces are the pieces that I think Ria and Kenya, from what they shared, are going to draw out of it, because we're going to force you to ask, what is your reason for teaching? And listening to the sound of your own voice as you play in the 300 is why this year is just, it's one of, I think we'd all say it's probably our favorite part of being in yoga studio management, but it's also the most transformative part for students. Okay, so Jess is going to say, well, I've done the 200 hour. What happens as you now stretch me into everything you've given me as a skill set? What happens is you now stretch me as a teacher? Well, two things happen. In the structure of the 300 hour, you're given the opportunity to self-pace. It's a very grown-up training. So she may weekend one be like, got it, body language. Here's what we're playing with. I want to volunteer teach, and we're going to have 40 people. We will not go higher than that. We have very strict limits. This is not an 80-person training. It sells out months before we graduate. Every year we get the tearful calls saying, I didn't register in time. We won't go bigger because we pour so much energy into your teaching. She'll raise her hand, and in February, she'll be ready to like showcase with this group of 40, a full class, what does integrating use of anatomy or use of philosophy look like? Then, in addition to that, when she's ready to go on the floor at Down Under, we have our 300 hours actually teach classes with those of us who are leading you on delivery in the room. So I'll come and watch that, and then we'll see you apply that to our students, and then we'll give feedback that way. So I'm kind of giving you a feeling of what does it mean to say an incubation lab? You know, I throw out something like use of humor. That's maybe the hardest to nail. In February and March, use of humor is pretty sloppy, right? I think of it as it's more like rough, and it's kind of a rabbi and a priest walk into a bar kind of category. By September and October, your understanding of what humor is has grown up so much because of the maturation process of you being willing to put yourself out there and play, fall flat on your face, hear your voice, try something new, experiment. So by September and October, use of humor is not cracking jokes. It's this beautiful flirtation with the energy in the actual room, and that you're playing with this ability to make people feel safe and slightly provoke or push where needed, right? Mr. Iyengar said the purpose of yoga is to teach your students courage. So we're not only making people strong and flexible and observing their physical observations and having that translate to their emotional observations. You try to put a group of people trying handstand for the first time, and you are asking them to delve deep inside them to begin to play. That is a magnificent privilege. And if you want to know what defines all of the consummate professionals who've been part of the teacher training and lead it, it's that none of us have ever lost our sense of awe for what a privilege it is to stand in front of a room of 40 people, ask them to close their eyes, and at the end of class, just feel. You don't know what they're feeling. They may be feeling the effects of radiation treatment or chemotherapy. They may have gone through a divorce or a loss. They may have just been promoted. You don't know the huge breadth of what human beings are feeling. And that is what we spend one full year cultivating. Have a look at the 300 page and you'll see how many of our graduates, how many of our super beloved teachers graduated 12 years ago from the 300, but it is kind of what it takes. And part of the reason I spend all this time talking to you in this way is, look, I don't care if you do it with us. Really, I don't. I want you to go do your research, but I don't want and have spent 20 years fighting against the myth that there's something wrong with you if you don't feel thoroughly equipped to teach after 11 weekends. Because it's not honest. We should tell people it takes time, and the best teachers are the ones who remain the students, who are constantly hungry. Natasha Atsopoulos is arguably one of the country's most well-known vinyasa teachers. She'll lead you in alignment. Patricia Walden says the more famous Natasha became, the more humble she became. Natasha studies under Patricia. These teachers are in their 50s, 60s, and 70s, and they're still interested in learning. That makes longevity in teaching. I'm nearly done. That brings me to the last piece I really want you to understand, which is we're not just studying how to be a great teacher. We're studying longevity in teaching and the secrets you're learning from 20, 30, 40-year career professionals. I'll tell you why that's important. And again, sorry, I'm sort of like all the cards in the table the first time we meet, but it's good for you to know who I am, right? The yoga industry, one of the most valuable things you'll get is locate your 300 at a space that walks the walk. Whether it's with us, do not do a 300 at a place that does not pay its teachers sick days. It's not only philosophically problematic that you're learning from people that don't pay their teachers sick days, they will not equip you with how to survive in this industry. The yoga and fitness industry breaks into two models. One is the corporate model. So think Lifetime, Core Power, Equinox. Gyms are great because they get you your sea legs. There's always some bodies in the room teaching. Does that make sense? And they are legit. You will be classified as an employee, which you legally should. It's questionable how much money you'll make or whether you can put bread on their table, but you will be formally classified correctly. On the other hand, when the pandemic hits, those corporations fired hundreds, if not thousands, of employees, usually with a mass email after decades of service. Nothing I am saying is not on public record. This isn't my opinion. This is fact. They fired everyone overnight. Down Under, by contrast, said, we also thought we were going under, but we were like, at least we'll go under together. We're like, we'll go into this without firing a single teacher or manager. Now, it turned out to be the best thing we could have ever done because all the headliners from the corporate joined, we grew, and we actually opened in the pandemic. I said the yoga industry breaks into two different models. One is the large corporations. The other is the mom and pop yoga studio, which we all think of as loving. Yoga's dirty little secret. Almost all of those yoga studios are operating illegally. What I mean by that is they classify you as a yoga teacher as an independent contractor. That means you're being paid and not getting sick days. You do not have unemployment insurance. You do not have access to healthcare. You do not have access to, and I can go on and list the other benefit, matching retirement. You can't be a wellness teacher if your employer doesn't give you the most fundamental employee benefits that you're entitled to in the state of Massachusetts. Does that make sense? So a huge thing that you're learning from this group of teachers is the business of yoga and how to set yourself up professionally to survive in an industry that frankly is deeply flawed and is still evolving. Anyway, I think that was much longer than what Kate was anticipating I was saying, but that's pretty much my starting overview. I will be your delivery coach, and think of that as when you're watching a Shakespeare play, there's the actors and there's the audience, and we're engaged in the play itself. But if you've ever taken an English literature class, they're not watching the play and they're not the actors. They're sitting back reading, saying, oh, look, this is foreshadowing when Macbeth kills Duncan. They're analyzing the play that's written. Does that make sense? Think of me as the person who every weekend that we're together, which is almost all the weekends, I'm going to be training you to analyze great teaching. I'm going to want you to unpack the secrets of the teachers, because it's not mysterious. You might think it's a je ne sais quoi, like, David McGowan's a mythical, magical creature teaching, trans breathing and Tibetan Buddhism mixed with a flow class. Oh, Meredith just is exceptionally charismatic and good at building numbers with her Hot 26 or Sculpt. Michael Ponte, people must just really like him. No, they're doing very tried and tested secrets of outstanding teaching. And my job is by about April, I've usually succeeded. I get you to be the literature class and to understand those ingredients. And the proof that I am happy with where we are is usually about April or May. I've critiqued with such theming that you start to do it yourself. And the 300 start to be able to identify what we're analyzing, looking at it and being like, oh, I saw you trying to use of silence, use of humor. Okay, here's a thought on this. And that's what's just so incredible, which is why usually halfway through the 300-hour, many people who entered being like, Kenya said, oh, I'm a hot power teacher. I'm going to want to teach this. Have actually done a 360 and been like, holy crap, I'm suddenly realizing what I want to do as a teacher is this. Then the second half of the training is spent getting you really, really good at doing that. And again, I just want to reiterate, we're the opposite of wanting you to teach like us. Our job is to pull out what kind of a teacher you're meant to be and set you up for success in that trajectory. Anyway, that's what I do. Thank you, Kate.
Thank you. Justine said most of this, but I'm just going to highlight a few things that I want to make sure that you hear. Some of the other teachers you get to work with, Natasha Rosopoulos. She, again, is one of the most well-respected and precise alignment teachers out there. And she's going to be mainly dealing with your asana, working through families of poses. You'll also be meeting Masaki Okamura. He and I will do a little taster of art of assisting, just so you have some tools in your tool belt, and then you can decide if you want to continue that training later. You'll also meet David Magone, who, as Justine said, is a meditation pranayama teacher. He will come in. You'll also have some of Sabi Lal, who has a doctorate and will come in to do meditation and pranayama. And she was one of you once upon a time. She took our 200 and then our 300, and now she's part of our teaching faculty and actually off to Harvard Divinity School currently doing more studying, because she is the best example of a teacher who is also just in love with learning. So those are some of the main people. You'll also have people come in and teach you specialties, things that you might want to add, we call it strings to your bow, so that you have a lot of different diversity to bring into your teaching. So those are some of the people that you'll also meet with the 300. And just to go over just a little bit of the specificity details so that you have the context for any questions you might want to ask of us. This is a year-long training. It's one weekend a month. Generally, it's the last weekend of the month, but with holidays, it sometimes shoots to the second weekend of the month. But I put in the chat, I actually didn't mean to send it that early, but enter happened and it went in anyway. So you'll see all of the dates up on the first link that I shared. And the span of the weekends are Friday nights, 7:15 to 9:15, then Saturday, Sunday, 1:15 to 8:15. And there's like a half hour, 45-minute break on Saturday, Sunday. So you can go get food, you can move your car, you can do any of the things you need to do in that little time between the two sessions. Over the course of the year, you are also asked to take at least 30 classes with the lead teachers of the training, ideally. So we really do hope that you will take Natasha Rosopoulos' classes. We really hope that you'll go and try Iyengar classes and the Ashtanga schools classes and yoga sculpt and everything in between, because again, all of these teachers at our school make up what the whole of our training can and should be, right? It's you can learn from anyone and everyone at our studio. And even if you decide wow, I really don't like this style of teaching, you're still learning from that. So we really do ask that you suck all of the flavor out of our studio while you are in our training. Along with taking 30 classes, the only extra things, because a lot of people are worried about how much more stuff do I have to do beyond the weekends and taking classes? The only extra thing you have to do to graduate from the 300 is what's called the Karma Class Project, which is you as a teacher set up on your own 3 classes over the course of the year, each an hour long, where you will teach for the benefit of some sort of community. It could be your friends in your backyard. I'm really not picky about it, but some people do take initiative to say, for example, we had a group of people all go to a firehouse last year, and they took turns doing weekly classes for the fire people there. So that's a really beautiful way that you can sort of teach outside of the bounds of a regular yoga studio. When I did it, I was in the first 300-hour class that Down Under had. When I did it, I went and taught at Dana-Farber for parents of sick children, right? And you get to have that experience of teaching for people who might not be used to doing yoga, who might not be in a yoga studio, you might not even have yoga mats. Then you just write up a little reflection piece, and I give you some questions to answer in that reflection piece. So that's the only other time outside of classes and taking the actual weekends. Now, weekends, as Justine said, we are very flexible. We understand we're all adults. We might have jobs. We might have weddings or things like that to go to. So if you happen to miss a weekend, or if you can't be present because you're sick or something, every single session is live streamed. So you can join via the screen, because I also saw we have someone from Germany on the call. So we have had people join from all over the world for this training. It's not at all unusual. We also do have recordings. So after the live stream happens, like the Tuesday after, I post the recordings of the weekend so you can watch what happened if you missed something, write up notes to make up your absence, and then that's a way that you can also attend the training. Again, we try to make this as flexible as possible so that it really can fit into your life, even if you have a lot of other things going on, you know? I think that is where I will pause. Any questions that have come up?
And we should say, I mean, this is sort of where it gets really interesting. Like, we're happy to ask logistical questions. Like, we'll often get asked, is there homework? So we can kind of deal with that one straight away. There isn't. It is a really grown-up training. It's a year long. So if you have the luxury of time and are able to, as I will say, suck the marrow out of the training, we are going to have endless lists of things that you can do should you have the time. But part of it will be dictated by you, meaning Sabi will have 17 suggestions if philosophy is what is lighting you up. Does that make sense? Or if you're really excited to dive deeper into the subtle body or the Ayurveda or the business of your, whatever it is, you can make it as expansive or not. We're not in the habit of, you need to have this assignment returned by the next weekend. So it really is the weekends. And then again, your choice. You can be bugging Kate every other month to be like, I'm ready for a community class, add that on. Or you can say, nope, the weekends are feeling safe and I like the incubation lab. This is where I want to. So you can ask logistical questions, cost, parking, whatever. But it's also really a forum now where we sort of open it up to you to ask things that are meaningful to you. I am worried it won't have enough of this particular type of thing, or I'm worried that my ankle is broken and I can't do handstand, in which case we're going to say no big deal. It can be kind of all over the map in terms of questions. We're just sort of happy to take the conversation in whatever direction you'd like it to go.
I have a couple of quick logistic questions, and I'm sorry, I logged in late. I was actually just coming home from teaching class, so I apologize for being here late. How long will the recordings last?
You have the access to recordings for a year after the training. So
Okay.
that's the other thing I can say, is that if you do find that your life gets super busy next year, you have a full year. So this training ends December 2025. You have until December 2026 to complete all of your requirements. So you'll have access to the recordings for at least that long in order to complete all of your requirements.
Great. And for the karma class that you've just mentioned, is it just one charity class that
Three
throughout?
over the course of the year, each an hour long. So the community classes that Justine's talking about, those aren't the same thing. Those are where you come and teach with other people within the studio, and then Justine, Michael, Ponte, myself, anyone will come and give you feedback based on that. So those are for more direct feedback. The karma classes are something you can set up entirely on your own.
Right.
We do have a few places that we have contact with, and I'll share that with you when you start the training so that you can reach out to places. But again, I'm not picky.
And how many of those, the ones that we get feedback from, how many of those do we have to teach?
You don't have to do any
No,
of
you
them.
don't have to. So that's where I said during the weekends, like I said, Jess might be ready on February to be like, okay, I'm ready to go, like wanting to try, you know.
I see. Gotcha.
Ria might be like, oh, I'm still finding my feet here. It might be more like April or May before you see me teaching the weekend. On the other hand, Kenya might be like, oh, not only am I ready to teach in front of my 40, put me on the floor at Down Under. And so then she's going to say, I'm ready to go into the community class. So you're self-pacing depending on how much of a fire hose feedback you're ready for. And again, you know, some of this feedback takes a hot minute to integrate, right? Like it's getting deeper than the 200 hour. Like it's not just, you know, reframe your question instead of barking orders to be a use of questions, right? That's like a kind of a 200 level dialogue. This is actually really trying to kind of draw out of you and challenging you to get very clear on what your mission as a teacher is. Because the funny thing about teaching is when you graduate, you can often fall into the trap of, I'm going to try to teach what students want. Oh, I see that the hot power classes have 40 people in it. I should be a hot power teacher because then I'll have lots of people in my class. It's the most flawed thinking you can have. It never works. It doesn't matter what kind of a teacher you want to make. We have a 20-year track record of whatever kind of teacher you want to be. If you are comfortable in your own skin, if you stand up and it's very clear that you're driving the bus, your students are going to find you. Whether that is teaching 6 poses a class or 46 poses a class. Does that make sense?
Yes,
And
thank
so
you.
that's where we have to allow you to self-pace. This is not a we push you kind of deal.
Perfect. Thank you. Kate, one more logistic question, I promise, then I'll give
Please.
the floor back to you guys. I've already taken Art of Assisting with you and Masaki. So great. But does this mean I have to take it again for the 300?
Nope.
It's not required. It's highly, highly, highly recommended.
Oh, okay.
So
Thank you. Thank you.
because of Yoga Alliance's new rules post-pandemic, hands-on assists are no longer required to be part of teacher training. So we do have a session that will be in the first weekend where we'll give you just sort of familiar things so that everyone has some things to do. It'll be very familiar to the first like hour or two that you do an Art of Assisting so that everyone in the 300 gets a taste of it. But no, you do not have to sign up for the Art of Assisting. If you do sign up for the 300 though, you would get a 50% off discount on the Art of Assisting should you choose to take it. And you do also get discounted class passes for taking class over the course of the year as well. And that would be available to anyone as soon as you sign up for the 300. You just let me know and I would adjust that for you or sell that to you. What else am I forgetting? I think that that's it.
That's it. That's it from me. Thank you.
For those of you who don't know, so assisting refers to hands-on adjustments. You probably know this, but again, teachers can divide into very different categories or preferences when it comes to this, meaning we're never going to tell you you have to assist. If you want to do hands-on assists, we offer a weekend intensive that will equip you to do so incredibly skillfully. But if you're a teacher who's like, I want completely from a trauma-informed lens or whatever lens you're coming from, you're like, that will never be something I want to incorporate in my teaching. That is not an expectation of the 300 because we have to, again, allow the teacher to determine their journey. Other questions, things you'd like to know about what we do, what it's like?
So I actually started a 300-hour program last year, but I had a medical issue and I had to stop. So in that program, we had a project that we had to focus on, like our own project. Um, and so I'm just wondering, like, is that because you said there isn't any outside work other than the weekends? Will we have like something specific that we're focusing on eventually, or it like that we would dedicate time to, or is it just kind of like you will give us the breadth of all these different um, things, and then we kind of decide like what we want to focus on our own? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's not as polar opposite of either of those. It's somewhere in a middle path. You'd have to give me an example of the project. Give me an example of what you mean.
Like
when you-
I was going to focus on Ayurveda, and at the time my plan was I wanted to open my own studio and I wanted to um have like more of a focus on Ayurvedic principles and now my entire life has changed. um, but that's just like that was my project. Some people decided to focus on sequencing and something specific with that, or
Yeah, okay. So no, I'm definitely not going to be like, you need to make a project that you work on to graduate as part of the 300.
okay.
Oh, not interesting to me. But yes, almost every weekend you have a project. Because think of it this way, it's not what you describe, which is show up, we just give you a lot of options, you can self-select and self-motivate. How can I put it? Because of the level of practice feedback I'm teaching, let's make something up. Let's pretend Jess is really talented at, she's got her vocal modulation down, she's got great bodily gestures going on, she comes down to meet them when they're in chaturanga, she's using, her body in a way that truly emulates what she's teaching. The only problem is Jess wants to fix everything in a pose. And so every pose that she's doing is just so unbelievably overwhelming that you can't even say what the takeaway from Ardha Chandrasana was. Jess's homework for that week is going to be project-like. I'm going to want her to take Natasha's class or Kate or Michael for a month straight. And I'm going to give her the project that she's only allowed to give a student 2, maximum 3 cues in a pose, because otherwise their brain explodes. That's Jess's February project. I'm hoping by March, I've given her such a clarity in her feedback of teaching that by the time we're talking about April, I can move on to Jess's use of philosophy or storytelling. But do you see how, Ria, I can't do that if the words aren't even coming off her tongue in a natural way yet? Does that make sense? There is an order and a layering of skill sets. So the answer to your question is, yeah, almost every weekend you are leaving with a personal project of integrating the pretty serious level of feedback you're being given in this particular realm. So it's just much more individualized. So let's take your example, Ria. If you are passionate about Ayurveda, by February, I'm going to know that you want to either be teaching. I know you said your life's completely changed now, but what does that mean? I'm going to force you to say what that means. If you want to open a studio, by April, we'll have had the conversation. Okay, your number one challenge with Ayurveda is the shingle thing doesn't work. Over and over again, you're putting out Ayurvedic health counselors. The problem with Ayurveda, this is the business of yoga conversation, is it's not as well known as yoga, right? So it's very, very hard. There's a million Ayurvedic health counselors out there and they hang their shingle up. But unlike massage, where if you find a good massage therapist, you go back and you go back and you go back again. Ayurveda is not like that. Usually, if you look at the model, people go to one Ayurvedic health consultation, maybe, particularly if you're an Ayurvedic doctor, they'll do a follow-up with you, but it's not an ongoing line of yoga. And then you'll say to me, oh, Justine, I'm not interested in doing Ayurvedic counseling. I want to integrate Ayurvedic yoga and be teaching yoga class to Ayurvedic principles. Well, what does that mean? Does it mean you want to teach a vinyasa class, Ria, but change it so that in spring, you're introducing all of the dinacharya and the rhythms that come along with spring yoga? And then in fall, and then we'd talk about, oh, well, the way you do that would be to have transitioning into fall and spring workshops. But often Ayurveda is better done as workshops because a lot of your mainstream people aren't particularly interested in doing Ayurvedic yoga. I mean, these would be all the conversations we'd be having. So do you see how it's less didactic than what you're suggesting. I'm certainly not going to go and give you all projects to go away and hand back into me. We're actually doing the work in the sessions. And should you have the time to tackle it, you'll take each project and feedback and hopefully integrate it by the time I see you 30 days later. Now, some of these things take more than a month to integrate. It might be that Jess, the second time I see her, okay, she's got it down to 2 or 3 instructions, but they're still very vague. She's still talking about raise your leg. And I'm not really sure where forward and backward is. And then my second month, I've got to work with her on specificity of cueing. So what I'm trying to do in answering your question is help you understand how this is entirely focused on the individual journeys of people who already have a 200 out under their belt. And that's why I don't do the 200. I come in only at the 300 where you know the alphabet. And now I'm figuring out how to help gently push you to a level where you can execute a class that draws the people who are ultimately going to be your students to want to stay and leaves you feeling competent and confident that you can do that. So I don't know if that answers your question, but yes and no is the best way I know how to answer the question about projects.
The one thing I'll just add is that there is, at the end of the training, teaching practicums. So that is sort of, I guess, a project. So in November, you'll do a practicum for Justine, where she'll be able to give you feedback on, 5 minutes of a vinyasa sequence. And then on the very last weekend, you have studio leaders, including myself, our yoga director, our faculty director, people who are in charge of auditions and hiring, do a sort of, it could be a mock or a real audition, depending on how you feel about it, and get feedback based on that audition. So it could just be for the experience of trying to audition. It could be literally wanting to work for Down Under and auditioning for real. So that is sort of a project that I guess we do ask for at the end of the training.
Right. You're preparing for it every weekend. Yeah, it's great.
I do want to be
Yeah,
mindful. We've gone over time. So if you need to leave, feel free to follow up. But if you have more questions, I'm happy to stay. I'm sure Justine's happy to stay. I just don't want to keep anyone who might have had Saturday plans.
I'm still feeling like I'm looking for a sense of what's happening in the weekends. Like if you have 40 people attending, like how are you able to give that individual attention? Is it like a lot of small group work, or what's the general format?
Yeah. Kate, you want to break down days, or you want me to?
Yeah, generally. So Friday nights are usually more specialized, workshop-y, continuing ed things. Like you might have me come in and do sort of a refresher on anatomy and talking about planes of movement, just so that we have everyone on the same plane, literally. And then you'll have a more asana-based section, usually Saturday morning. That's usually with like a Natasha. And then in the second half of the day, you might be doing something more philosophical or history learning from Sabi. And then at least once every weekend, there might be 1 or 2 times where this doesn't happen, then you'll have a visit from either Justine, me, Michael, someone to give you practice teaching time one-on-one, and they're usually themed within the weekend. Each weekend has sort of a loose theme as well. Like weekend 1 is, of course, beginning the journey, and then weekend 2 has anatomy. Weekend 3 is about more standing and body language. So each weekend has a little bit of a theme, and then we incorporate practice teaching into each of those weekends. So in that way, everybody gets a chance to practice teach if they're there and they raise their hand. But of course, people miss weekends, things happen. So then you get the chance the next weekend. Or again, if you are someone who really wants to suck the marrow out of the training, as Justine says, you might come in and do community classes. You get what you put in with this training. You can just show up and do all the weekends and get the 300. You can also do every single community class that we offer and get a little bit more feedback and a little bit more attention.
Yeah, and thanks for breaking down the day. I'll answer the sort of spirit of what you're asking, Rhea, which is, well, how do you really get the individual piece come out? And rather than sort of offering you words, I think I'll sort of use actual specific examples. Usually by March, April, May, the whole group intimately knows what each other's strengths and weaknesses are. And that I can really only attribute to the quality of the training. I mean, this is literally a 20-year training that has been honed better and better every year. We got it really, really good, I think, about year 6. The last decade has just been a delight. So I'll just use first name. So this year, by April, we knew Sam, a lovely alignment-based teacher, was clearly going to lean, since we had watched Sam try on the body language and try on vinyasa and heated flow. And what we were seeing is that Sam just was trying to do something that wasn't innately Sam. Sam really is, he's a scientist and he's meticulous. And he really loves detail. And so by about April, it wasn't just me giving the feedback, like there's an incredible, that's why we're so contained about it. So Eliza is somewhere in the middle. Eliza likes the flow and, but definitely wants to be alignment-based flow. And then Kirsten was very convinced in February that she was just hot power, and that what hot power was essentially, I can best describe it as I said to her, you've been taught to just chase shapes. And what I mean by chasing shapes is she'd just call the poses and maybe throw in drive-by philosophy. Drive-by philosophy would be something like, I don't know, what's the most cliched? Get comfortable with discomfort, right? Like some absolutely cheesy ass cliched thing that every yoga teacher in Boston is saying, or Sira and Stuka, and effort and effortlessness. If you only say one sentence, do you understand how by definition it remains superficial? Part of my job is to take what I call the corporate cheerleader kind of yoga. You can do it. And it's like this kind of yoga philosophy. Listen, there's nothing wrong with Louise Hay, but like that kind of like you can cure your cancer just by positive thinking. Like it lacks a depth that really appreciates how vulnerable human beings are and how little that we can control about our circumstances. So a lot of my job was taking Kirsten from what I would call drive-by philosophy or kind of cheesy calling of poses into deepening her language. So she moved more to the terrain of, I don't know, a psychologist or a rabbi or someone with wisdom and depth that sounded as if they understood the complexity of life. Sam, Kirsten, and Eliza knew each other's teaching for sure by March or April. And then they asked if they could do a community class together. And then they asked if they could go a step further and give each other feedback. It's November. We're just bringing Kirsten to the floor now. But it has taken me 6 months to teach her a quality of dialogue that she's ready, because the caliber of the Down Under is really high. Like, I don't do her any favors by throwing her on the floor to have that disheartening experience of a bunch of teachers who people will show up, but they won't come back. So we're really good at knowing when someone is ready to teach. Sam has leaned into and not even pretending to be a vinyasa teacher anymore. And we've connected Sam with Patricia Walden and Nadia Rafai, the head of the Iyengar school, and they've given feedback and we've brought them into little so that's what I mean. It's not very difficult. I'm not trying to sound glib here, but like, we know where you're at because we've done it a really, really long time. And because of the rubric that we use, my whole goal is by April, you're actually using that rubric to understand your own light and shadow. If you want to be an up the mountain teacher like me, great. I mean, clearly I'm like, you can imagine what I'm like as a teacher, right? But like, where does that cross over into violence or to pushing people? If you're a milk of human kindness teacher and terribly gentle and tranquil, that's great. But like 60 minutes of somebody just talking like that, if that's their only repertoire, where does that become soporific, right? And just like, it's just a little dull. So I'm tasked with the job of stretching you north, south, east, and west. We have a teacher, Stephen Gresham, and actually another teacher who just made the floor, Craig Rodenstein. I probably spent a year with those guys trying to get them to yell. I'm not sure they ever actually yelled, but over the course of the year, they got a hell of a lot more interesting in their delivery. It is far more compelling now. And actually, even after Stephen was with us for like 2 or 3 years, but like actually did go into a class with him. And I'm like, oh, wait, he just found that voice in himself. So he does now have like a power I didn't, I started cultivating, but it's really interesting to watch what teachers do with these skills that we're pulling out of them. You're all on the screen. We're happy to stay as long as you want us to. We can talk about this all day, but as Kate said, gotta go. Feel free, and otherwise,
Sorry.
away.
No, please.
I had a question. Are there any, I guess, like led asana, like during our intensive, during our weekend intensives?
Yeah.
Quite a lot, yeah. Natasha Rosopoulos, again, sort of leads that charge, though you'll also have other teachers teaching things that they're specialists in. So you'll have some avant-garde teachers as well. You'll have Justine also do some asana with you, going upside down, sort of showing the difference between how Natasha's precise teaching going upside down is this sort of way, and then Justine's way of teaching might be a little bit more psychological. So there is asana incorporated into pretty much every weekend.
Yeah, we've designed the day. You're definitely not sitting lecture based for 8 hours. That's the worst. So every single day is curated. The first half, 1:15 to 4:15. It's not an asana class. Like, we're not just padding it, as you sometimes see, where we're like, oh, we'll do a bunch of asana and pretend that's a good use of 3 hours. But a lot of the work does involve physical practice and like showcasing, and we'll do it and then we'll analyze what we just did and then have you do it. So there are no days which are totally devoid of physical activity. So you do need to come kind of prep to practice in the earlier half of the day. And then we also don't do the 8-hour day with one teacher. It's pretty cleverly, the weekends are very compelling, and we've gotten really good at knowing how much you can digest in one sitting and how much is too much physical activity. So Kate was just referring to, like, there's a day where Natasha will teach you how to cue, let's say, handstand, headstand inversions, right? And she'll do so in an incredibly effective, skillful, cerebral way. You'll measure your distance from the wall, turn around, etc. 50% of the people in the class, that's like mind-blowing. The other 50 usually are in tears by the end of the day and like, oh, I don't like inversions. I'll come in and teach comparatively quite recklessly. I will not measure you from the door. I will literally talk you into the pose psychologically and through watching and observing bodies and seeing where you're afraid. And that 50% of people who were morose the day before will have that aha moment. And the point is, you want to take the best of both of us, because those different students are out there and we want to leave you equipped to teach both. Does that make sense? We would never put Natasha and I on the same day because you wouldn't be able to walk. So we're very deliberately, she's Saturday, I'm Sunday, but like we will be the active components on that day. Does that make sense? And really that, in some ways sums up the 300, like a 200-hour. Jess, we sort of lied to you. We kept it really, really simple. We were like, here's some train tracks. Go along the train tracks. Here's another train tracks. You can go along these two. And that's really how, because if you give a 200-hour too much more than pretty simple routes to follow, they can't actually learn the things they need to do in order to then go and unpack. It's sort of like, I always say I took my kids to the Guggenheim Museum and I was like, okay, we're going to learn about Kandinsky and modern artists. And when you walk in on the ground floor, there's this beautiful Parisian landscape. And you're like, oh, I didn't realize they have Monet and Impressionists here. And I went over and I was like, okay, guys, they must have some Impressionists here. And then you're like, holy mackerel, that is Picasso. And you're like, oh, of course. Before he put an eye next to an elbow or had his blue period or started being really creative, he learned to paint like the masters. That is how we see teacher training. You have to learn well-established methodologies, the things that are tried and tested before you can innovate. And the 300 hour is where we sort of come to you, Jess, and are like, just kidding. Actually, if you put Natasha, me, Kate, and Elliot, who's run studios across Boston for 20 years, in a room and said, Trikonasana, we're locking you in here, come out with an agreement in 3 days, we'd emerge and we would not agree 3 days later. And that's the nuance and the sort of sophistication that when you've learned the basics, you've learned the practice and can do the Parisian landscape, you can go on and then do whatever you want. But we're building off a hierarchy of skills. And that's where I'm not a big believer in the 200 hours. It's great to journal and do big kumbaya circles, but it's just actually a waste of time, because until you've learned the skills, it actually doesn't matter what lovely discourse you'd like to, hold court on. You have to earn your teaching chops, and then the music and the poetry comes on top. Other questions?
I have a few points. One question is, how much teaching are we doing of the cohort, like during the weekends? And then kind of a follow-up, I'm still a little nervous. I don't have enough experience to pull from, right? I've only taught 2 classes and I'm on like a sub rotation. I don't teach weekly on a regular basis.
Yep.
Just because of my job, and I don't see that changing, right? So like if I were to take this program.
Happy to answer that.
Yeah.
I know that it's a very common question. Yes, you teach the cohort when you're ready. Yes, to Ria's question, you're doing small groups, you're doing you will get tremendous exposure. And no, you do not need to be a teacher in order to take this 300. And we have a lot of people who will come because they've plateaued in their teaching. We'll have studio owners coming from Canada. We've had people from Germany. We'll people come up from Washington, D.C. to do this training. And we will deliberately encourage see you later, Ria. We'll deliberately encourage 200s to go straight into this. And I'll tell you why. Because it doesn't gain me anything from you going out and spending your next 2 years at the gym flailing and trying to, I know it seems like it would, right? It seems like, well, wouldn't you want to get good life experience? No, not really. You've learned the alphabet. Could I go on and teach you the rest of it now so that you can actually put what we've taught you into practice? And honestly, you can't get there by yourself. I mean, I shouldn't say that. I guess there's probably a really good 200-hour teacher out there doing fantastic work. But for most mere mortals, they actually need mentorship. They need feedback. They need to take these skills and have some sense of, oh, this worked and this didn't. So I'm going to tell you to move straight into there and never look back. And that is going to actually result in you having a far more positive experience teaching.
Okay.
So that's my answer to that.
Okay. Thank you.
Of course.
I have one last question. In terms of our teaching materials or learning materials, will you be teaching from a specific text, or will we be is there required reading and that kind of thing?
You will get a manual at the start of the training, so that's provided to you, and that does have teaching cues in it. It has many asana in it, and it has some articles towards the end. But again, it might just be like, reference this in the back of your manual. It's there for you. Some teachers, depending on their session, because sessions are updated every year, they might have a thing they want you to bring with you. It might be like, here's some journaling we want you to do prior to this session. But again, it's all very invitational, and you'll get an email from me every week, the Monday before, with anything special you might need to know. Like there are some sessions where we're like, If you're out of state, of course, or out of the country, of course, join via live stream. But this session is really designed best to be in person. So if you can be in person, be in person. I always send emails to help prepare you each week to tell you what you need and what might be useful to do beforehand. Cool. I'm just going to go in because I didn't actually say this surprisingly, but if you are going to apply, there is the application link underneath the main link I sent about the teacher training. You need to fill out the application and put down your deposit to hold your spot. We're doing an early bird until the 15th of November, which means you'll get $200 off of the tuition. And we have payment plans. It's all outlined in the application, but I will send a follow-up email to this info session with the recording. So I know a few people messaged me saying they were going to watch the recording. Hi, people watching the recording. Feel free to email me if you have any questions. And as Justine says, there's nothing too small or silly. We know that this is a big investment of time, of energy, of resources. So very happy to schedule calls or email back and forth, whatever is easiest, so that you feel like you're really well resourced in making your decision about continuing your education. Anything else before we part ways? Okay. Well, thank you all so much for making the time on a Saturday morning.
Yeah, great questions. Lovely to meet everyone.
Lovely.
Very
We hope
excited to meet with you if you join us.
Thanks, Kate. Thanks, Justine.
Yeah.
Pleasure.
I'll see you later, Rung. We're doing inversions in my 200 today, so we get to do
Thank you.
more.
All right,
more.
bye.